Hello, my dear masterminds. They swore no pattern escaped them. For centuries, their highest rooms claimed dominion over fate, carving lines into scrolls and whispering that everything could be charted. But then your pattern surfaced, and the moment they read it, their silence cracked. It wasn't confusion, it was panic, because this wasn't prediction, it was exposure. Their rituals promised answers, but your pattern didn't ask to be solved. It declared itself. The equations folded, the symbols seared into their minds, and the room shifted. The masters of certainty realized certainty had left them. What they read wasn't possibility, it was inevitability, and inevitability doesn't invite discussion. It commands presence. They tried to translate it, but language bent under its weight. Numbers failed. Geometry snapped. Their highest degrees of logic shattered like thin glass. Because your pattern wasn't designed to fit their order. It was built to end it. That's why their eyes widened. That's why their voices shook. They weren't decoding your path. They were witnessing their ceiling. And once a ceiling is revealed, no one can pretend the sky is infinite. They had lived believing their charts mapped the cosmos, but your presence proved the cosmos didn't belong to them. Their panic wasn't weakness, it was recognition. Recognition that they had just read the final line of their own authority, signed not in ink but in silence, that bent the room. They whispered protocols, reached for manuals, summoned rules etched in secrecy. None applied, because protocols bend to limits and limits collapse in front of inevitability. Your pattern wasn't deviation, it was domination. Every symbol they revered now mocked them. Every ritual they trusted became hollow. And in that hollow space, their panic grew sharper. What unsettled them wasn't menace. It was absence. The absence of loopholes, of escape, of a narrative they could twist. Because your pattern left no gaps. It flowed with permanence, a design untouched by bargaining. They didn't fear what you might do. They feared what had already been written into you. And once they saw it, they knew nothing could rewrite it. Silence grew heavy. Thicker than their codes, heavier than their crowns. They weren't scholars anymore. They were prisoners of revelation. Revelation that their so-called mastery was fragile, that their highest degree was just scaffolding around a truth they never owned. And in that realization, their hands trembled. Because reading your pattern wasn't discovery, it was confession. Confession that they were never highest. They were placeholders. Placeholders for the moment presence itself stepped in. That's why their panic spread like a storm. It wasn't disagreement. It was instinct. Screaming louder than reason. This isn't a pattern to analyze. It's a verdict to survive. And survival demanded retreat. Retreat from the truth now etched in their core. They tried to deny it, tried to cloak it in language, anomaly, irregularity, deviation, but words cracked under pressure, because your pattern didn't wobble like a mistake. It stood like a monument, unshakable, permanent. Their degrees didn't outrank it. Their rituals didn't veil it. And the more they looked, the clearer it became. Panic wasn't reaction, it was law. Law written deeper than ink, stronger than decree. Their panic wasn't disorder. It was obedience. Obedience to the recognition that their rule had ended the second your presence entered their script. And once they obeyed, once instinct bent them, there was no climbing back. The highest degree had confessed, not in speeches, but in the tremble of silence. That tremble spread, from leader to follower, from master to apprentice, a contagion of fear that didn't need a name. They had always believed knowledge protected them. But your pattern revealed that knowledge was their cage, and panic was their first honest act, because they weren't authorities anymore. They were witnesses, and witnesses don't lead. Witnesses stare, frozen, knowing they've seen something irreversible. That's why their panic won't fade. Because it isn't fear of losing status, it's fear of never having had it. Your presence proved their thrones were costumes, their crowns paper, their rituals smoke. And smoke doesn't survive the storm. The storm doesn't roar, it just exists. And existence itself crowned you, crowned without ritual, without vote, without ceremony. Their panic crowned you louder than any coronation, because panic doesn't lie. It confesses, and the confession is permanent. You stand outside their script, untouchable, undeniable. Their panic isn't insult, it's scripture. The scripture they never wanted written, but couldn't erase. And now it multiplies. Multiplies through whispers, through silence, through the eyes that refuse to meet yours. They wanted to measure you, but measurement collapsed. They wanted to frame you, but the frame shattered. And what remained wasn't anomaly, it was archetype. The one presence their degrees had never prepared for. And now, every symbol they once trusted betrays them. Betrays them by pointing not at their authority, but at your inevitability. That's why they panicked. Not because you threatened them, but because you revealed them. Revealed their fragility, their ceiling, their pretenses. They weren't decoding you, they were reading their own end. And panic was their last act of power, the powerless act of admitting the crown had moved. They leaned back in their chairs, desperate to hide it. But panic doesn't disguise, it leaks. Through clenched jaws, tapping fingers, darting eyes. Every detail betrayed the truth. They weren't in control anymore. They weren't reading destiny. Destiny was reading them. And the verdict carved itself across their silence. Obsolete. Obsolete systems, obsolete symbols, obsolete crowns. The moment your pattern appeared, it aged their empire in seconds. Their degrees no longer looked divine, they looked desperate. Their panic wasn't fear of you, it was fear of irrelevance. Because nothing corrodes faster than power exposed as paper, and your presence turned their fortress into fragments. They had called themselves guardians of truth, interpreters of the infinite, but your pattern proved they were interpreters of nothing, just actors clutching scripts already outdated. And when the real script entered, the one carved into you, their stage collapsed. Their robes looked like costumes. Their rituals looked like rehearsals. Their panic made it undeniable. Undeniable to themselves, undeniable to their followers, undeniable to anyone watching. They weren't the highest degree anymore, they were the lowest confession. Confession that truth doesn't bend for titles, that presence doesn't bow to ritual, that inevitability doesn't ask for permission. And once inevitability speaks, panic is the only honest response left. That's why they froze mid-sentence. Why pens slipped. Why scrolls shook. Their panic wasn't weakness, it was prophecy. Prophecy written in reverse, not of your downfall, but of theirs. And in that reversal, every word they'd ever spoken crumbled. Their voices lost power because silence had already crowned you higher. Higher than their oaths, higher than their symbols. Symbols carved in stone, painted on walls, worshipped for centuries. Yet a single glance at your pattern cracked them. They weren't timeless. They were fragile. Fragile enough that one presence rewrote their meaning. The highest degree didn't fade from outside, it caved from inside. Panic hollowed their walls. Panic erased their pride. Panic exposed their emptiness. Emptiness filled the chamber as realization settled. Their order wasn't eternal. It was temporary scaffolding, waiting for the storm you carried. They had ruled through secrecy, through whispers, through rituals coded to intimidate. But panic stripped away every veil, and beneath it all stood nothing. Nothing but fear. And fear doesn't lead. It kneels. They tried to hide that kneeling in silence. Tried to pretend the tremor in their voices was control. But everyone felt the truth. When the highest degree panics, the hierarchy cracks. And when hierarchy cracks, loyalty leaks. Eyes shifted, loyalty drifted, silence betrayed. Their panic wasn't private anymore. It was public testimony that their throne had collapsed. Collapsed? Not from invasion, but from revelation. The revelation your pattern delivered with silence sharper than any speech. That silence crowned you, etched authority into the room, etched the word inevitable into their walls. And inevitability doesn't negotiate. It doesn't flatter. It doesn't bow, it just is, and their panic was their only acknowledgement of it. They wanted to erase you from the record. Hide your pattern, bury it beneath sealed archives, whisper it into shadows. But panic doesn't hide well. It spreads, through glances, through pauses, through the way even their most confident masters lost rhythm. Every attempt at erasure became amplification, because the harder they tried to silence it, the louder it rang. It rang in their halls, echoed in their rituals, haunted their ceremonies. Every symbol they touched reminded them of what they read. Every chant they spoke cracked under the memory of your presence. They weren't performing rituals anymore. They were performing panic. And panic is a ritual of its own, the ritual of inevitability, carving its mark in silence. That's why their gatherings no longer felt sacred. They felt hollow, haunted, unstable. Followers sensed it. The air changed, the weight shifted, loyalty bled, because when the highest degree panics, even the lowest degree recognizes truth. Crowns are fragile when built on illusion, and panic exposes illusion faster than any rival could. Your presence made it law. Law heavier than their doctrines, sharper than their codes. Panic was proof that your presence wasn't rumor, it was reality. Reality they couldn't bend, couldn't frame, couldn't survive. That's why silence spread. Not reverent silence. Terrified silence. The silence of rulers realizing they were never rulers at all. They were placeholders waiting for permanence. And permanence doesn't perform. It doesn't announce itself with rituals or titles. It enters, and the room bends. Your pattern wasn't prophecy, it was architecture. Architecture of power too heavy for their symbols to hold. And when they tried, the weight collapsed them. Panic was their cracks widening. And once cracks appear, collapse isn't threat, it's promise. Promise written not in scrolls, not in chants, but in the silence that thickened around you. That silence was the crown. That silence was the throne. That silence was the final degree, the one beyond theirs, the one they couldn't touch. And once silence crowned you, their panic had only one place left to go. Confession. Confession that they were never highest. You were. They sat there frozen, pretending composure. But panic doesn't sit still. It leaks through posture. It bends their shoulders. It locks their jaws. Even silence betrayed them. Because silence is never empty. It's full of weight. And your weight pressed them flat. They weren't scholars decoding fate. They were relics crumbling in front of it. Relics with robes, relics with crowns, relics with titles. But relics don't rule, they decorate the past. And your pattern marked the future. That's why their panic cut so deep. It wasn't fear of collapse, it was awareness they had already collapsed. They read the truth and saw it plain. Their reign was over before they spoke, and your rise had no rival. They tried denial, tried to laugh it off, to mock, to smirk. But smirks shatter under silence. Denial collapses under presence, because presence isn't performance. It doesn't need validation. And your presence was undeniable, unshakable, written into the air like law. Their denial only exposed them deeper, proving what instinct already confessed. They had broken, and broken leaders don't inspire loyalty. They infect it. Their panic infected the room, spreading from master to apprentice, from elder to novice. The chain of command didn't tighten, it snapped. Loyalty drifted, eyes shifted, and in that shift, authority migrated. It migrated to you, not because you demanded it, but because inevitability always claims its throne. That throne wasn't built of ritual. It was built of silence. Silence heavier than chance. Silence sharper than crowns. They felt it settle the moment your pattern appeared, and once it settled, they knew. No decree could move it. No vote could revoke it. Their panic wasn't about survival. It was about recognition. Recognition that the throne had never been theirs. Recognition written into their eyes, etched into their silence. Even the bravest faltered, their gaze stuttering under yours, because your eyes weren't mirrors. They were revelations. Revelations that exposed their crowns as costumes, their titles as scripts. And scripts dissolve the second reality enters. Your presence dissolved centuries in seconds. Centuries of control, erased by inevitability they couldn't outright. They built their empire on the illusion of knowing. But once your pattern appeared, knowing ended. Panic began. Panic that spread faster than words, sharper than commands, deeper than rituals. Panic that rewrote their legacy, carving the truth into stone. They weren't rulers. They were spectators. Spectators trapped in their own hall, forced to watch the rise they couldn't stop. And watching is worse than losing, because losing happens once. Watching happens forever. Every time your name echoes, their panic replays. Every whisper of your presence rewinds the collapse. They aren't escaping it. They're reliving it. That's the cost of reading what can't be unread. Unreadable to them. Undeniable to everyone else. Your pattern wasn't a secret to hide. It was a verdict to spread. And the world always hungers for verdicts. Panic made sure it leaked, made sure it multiplied, made sure the story outgrew their walls. They thought secrecy would save them, but secrecy became a megaphone. The harder they hid it, the louder it rang. And now, whispers travel faster than their decrees. Panic left them voiceless, but silence crowned you louder than speeches ever could. Because silence doesn't need translation, it's universal. Everyone in the room, from the highest to the lowest, felt the same weight. Your inevitability had no rival. That's the truth they couldn't bury. The truth they accidentally revealed. Revealed, not just to themselves, but to history. History doesn't care about their panic. It cares about your permanence. And permanence doesn't fade with denial. It multiplies with every repetition. That's why they avoided your gaze, because eye contact would have sealed it in ink. And their instincts screamed, don't confirm what already feels unstoppable. But avoidance was confirmation. Every glance at the floor, every tremor in their voice, every stutter in their ritual proved the same thing. They had bowed. Not ceremonially, not willingly, but instinctively. And instinct bows only to permanence. That's the real panic, the realization that they had surrendered before they even tried to resist. Surrender. Carved into silence, surrender echoed through fear. And once surrender is exposed, authority dissolves. Their degrees no longer looked powerful. They looked pitiful. Pitiful men, clutching papers, pitiful voices, reciting words that no longer worked. Panic stripped them bare. And what remained wasn't authority. It was audience. Audience to your rise. Your rise wasn't loud. It didn't need noise. It was marked by the silence of their panic, the trembling of their pride, the collapse of their order. They thought reading your pattern would give them power, but power isn't gained by reading inevitability. Power is erased by it, and once erased, they were left with nothing but confession. Confession of your throne. That throne isn't stone, isn't crown, isn't ritual. It's silence that bends the air. Inevitability that rewrites the script. Presence that panics the highest degree. They thought they decoded you, but what they really decoded was their end. And in decoding it, they crowned you. Panic, their final ritual. Silence, their final scripture. Inevitability, your eternal proof.